Before the sun rises over the rainforest, the world is silent. A thin layer of mist drifts low across the jungle floor, curling between the roots of ancient ceiba trees. Somewhere in the green darkness, a jaguar moves. Its paws make no sound. Its eyes catch the first pale light of dawn. And then, slowly, the mist begins to lift. What you are about to see does not belong to a forgotten world. It belongs to a civilization that mapped the movements of Venus, predicted eclipses 2,000 years before satellites, and carved a written language so complex that scholars are still decoding its final secrets today. They built cities of white limestone that rose above the jungle like mountains. And they did it without metal tools, without the wheel, without beasts of burden. A drop of blood falls onto a strip of bark paper. The paper darkens, then catches fire. Smoke rises from a copper bowl, twisting upward toward an open temple doorway. A king kneels in the shadow, his tongue freshly pierced with a stingray spine. His queen kneels beside him, drawing a rope of thorns through her own. Around them, the city of Yaxchilan waits. The gods are listening. They believed the universe was held together by blood. Not violence, not cruelty, but sacrifice. The blood of kings, freely given, to feed the sun on its journey across the sky. To call rain from the throats of stone serpents. To keep the corn growing. Because without corn, there were no people. And without people, the gods would forget the world entirely. For more than 3,000 years, the Maya rose. They built more than 40 great cities. They fought wars, signed treaties, married princes to princesses, painted murals so vivid they still glow on temple walls today. And then, somewhere around the year 900, something began to break. The cities emptied, the pyramids fell silent, the jungle returned. For centuries, the world believed the Maya had vanished, but they had not vanished. They had endured. Today, more than 7 million people speak the languages their ancestors spoke 1,000 years ago. They weave the same patterns. They plant the same corn. They still read the stars. The Maya did not fall. The Maya are still here. And their story is one of the most extraordinary ever told on this earth. This is the story of the Maya, of how a people, scattered across jungles and mountains, built one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. Of how they raised stone cities to the sky. Of how they loved, fought, prayed, ate, and dreamed. Of how they vanished into legend and how they survived to walk among us still. The fire is burning. The codex is open. Step closer. The jungle is about to speak. To understand the Maya, you must first forget the word empire. The Maya were not one nation. They were not ruled by a single king, or a single capital, or a single law. They were a vast and brilliant constellation of city-states, scattered across the jungles, mountains, and limestone plains of Mesoamerica. Each city was its own world, each king its own sun. Their territory stretched across what we now call 5 countries: southern Mexico, with the heavy jungles of Chiapas and the dry limestone plains of the Yucatan Peninsula; Guatemala, with its highland volcanoes and lowland rainforests; Belize, with its coastal lagoons and reef; western Honduras, where the great city of Copan once stood; and the borderlands of El Salvador, a region the size of modern Italy, a region known simply today as the Maya world. Their history is divided into 3 great ages. The pre-classic, beginning around 2,000 years before Christ, when the first farmers cleared the forest and learned to coax life from corn. The classic, between roughly 250 and 900 of our era, when their civilization burned at its brightest. And the post-classic, the long twilight that followed, when new powers rose in the north and old cities fell to silence. Their cities were not villages, they were not even towns. They were sprawling capitals of stone, plaster, and color. Tikal, in the heart of the Guatemalan jungle, may have held 100,000 souls at its peak. Calakmul, its great rival to the north, perhaps more. Palenque, jewel of the western lowlands. Copan, the artist's city, Chichen Itza, the late northern queen, 40 cities, sometimes more, each one alive with markets, temples, and the murmur of 1,000 prayers. In their golden centuries, the Maya built more than mere buildings. They built a way of seeing the universe. They mapped the night sky with such precision that their predictions of Venus's appearances were accurate to within hours, across centuries. They developed the concept of zero, independently of any other civilization on Earth. They wrote in a script of more than 800 symbols, painted onto bark paper books they called codices. But the Maya were not only thinkers and builders, they were farmers, mothers, fathers, warriors, weavers, traders, and dreamers. They loved their children fiercely. They laughed in their marketplaces. They mourned their dead with songs and offerings. They drank thick, foamy chocolate sweetened with chili and honey. They argued over land. They told stories around evening fires. They were, in every way, completely and utterly human. For a long time, the world believed their story ended in tragedy, that sometime around the 9th century, their great southern cities fell silent, that the people simply disappeared. But this is not true. This was never true. The Maya did not vanish. They were never gone. Today, more than 7 million Maya live across Mexico and Central America, speaking some 30 distinct Mayan languages, carrying their ancestors' culture forward into the modern age. So this is not the story of a lost civilization. This is the story of a living one. A story that begins in the deep green of the Mesoamerican jungle, more than 4,000 years ago. A story that runs through stone palaces and bloody altars, through codices and conquests, through silence and survival. And it is a story that, even now, has not yet ended. To meet them, we have to begin where they began. With the land. With the rivers that never were. With the jaguars in the dark. With the limestone beneath their feet, and the stars above their heads. Come with us into the world of the Maya. The land that shaped the Maya is unlike any other on Earth. It is a place of contradictions, of jungles so thick the sunlight barely reaches the ground, and limestone plains so dry that not a single river flows across them, of volcanoes that rise 5,000 meters into the clouds, and coastal lagoons that whisper against white sand. To understand who the Maya became, you must first understand the land that demanded everything from them. In the south, the rainforests of the Petén and Chiapas spread for hundreds of miles in every direction. This is the Green Ocean, a canopy of mahogany, ceiba, and chicozapote trees so dense that, even at noon, the forest floor remains in twilight. Beneath that canopy lived jaguars, ocelots, tapirs, howler monkeys, and the fer-de-lance, a viper whose bite could kill a grown man before he reached his village. In the north, the world changed entirely. The Yucatan Peninsula is a flat shelf of porous limestone, scorched by sun, with no surface rivers and almost no lakes. Rain falls and disappears into the rock. For most peoples, this would have been a death sentence. But the Maya found water in the most unexpected places. Beneath the stone, vast underground rivers carved out collapsed sinkholes the Maya called cenotes, sacred wells, gateways to the gods. The cenotes were everything. They were the drinking wells that allowed entire cities to rise in a land without rivers. They were the swimming pools where children learned to splash and laugh. And they were the sacred mouths of Xibalba, the underworld. Into them, the Maya cast offerings of jade, gold, copal incense, and sometimes the bodies of those chosen to deliver messages to the gods below. To the southwest, in the highlands of Guatemala and Chiapas, the land rises sharply. Pine forests give way to volcanic peaks, some still active today. The air here is cool and thin. Mountain valleys are wrapped in mist for most of the morning. From these volcanoes came the lifeblood of Maya tools and weapons: obsidian, a volcanic glass, sharper than a modern surgical scalpel, that the Maya shaped into blades, arrowheads, and ceremonial knives. But the highlands gave the Maya something even more precious than obsidian. From the rivers of the Motagua Valley came jade, green, blue-green, and apple-green stone, harder than steel, harder to carve than almost any material on Earth. To the Maya, jade was not a luxury. It was sacred. It carried the color of young corn, the color of new life. It was the stone of kings, the stone of breath itself. The forests gave the Maya their food, their medicine, and their sacred fire. The chicozapote tree gave them chicle, a sticky gum they chewed for hours. The copal tree gave them incense, the smoke of which they believed carried prayers to the gods. The cacao tree gave them the bitter dark beans that were ground into the foamy chocolate drink reserved for kings and warriors. And the maize plant, above all, gave them their very humanity. But this land was not gentle. Hurricanes swept in from the Caribbean almost every year, flattening crops and tearing roofs from homes. Droughts could last for decades, turning fertile fields into cracked dust. Earthquakes rumbled beneath the highland cities. Volcanic eruptions, like the one that buried the village of Joya de Seren in El Salvador around the year 600, could vanish an entire community in a single afternoon. And yet, on this difficult, dangerous, beautiful land, the Maya did something extraordinary. They did not fight the land. They listened to it. They learned its rhythms. They terraced the steep slopes of the highlands. They dug raised fields in the lowland swamps. They mapped the rains. They followed the planting stars. They turned an impossible landscape into a garden of cities. This was the world the Maya inherited, a world that demanded ingenuity, patience, and devotion. And from this world, slowly, over thousands of years, they began to build something the jungle had never seen before: a civilization. The story of the Maya does not begin with pyramids. It begins with a single seed. Somewhere around 4,000 years before Christ, on the southern coast of what is now Guatemala, a small group of hunter-gatherers made a discovery that would change everything. They learned how to grow maize, a wild grass with a tiny ear of grain, slowly bred over generations into the golden corn we know today. With that one act, they stopped wandering. They built villages. They became the first Maya. For more than 1,000 years, these early Maya lived simple lives. They farmed small plots. They hunted deer and peccary. They fished in coastal lagoons. They made pottery, shaped clay figurines, and slowly, generation by generation, they multiplied. By the time the Greeks were building the Parthenon, the Maya were already constructing their first great cities deep in the jungle. The age we now call the pre-classic had begun. In the heart of the Petén jungle, in what is now northern Guatemala, the Maya built their first true wonder, a city called El Mirador. Its great pyramid, La Danta, rose more than 70 meters above the forest floor. By volume, it was one of the largest pyramids ever built anywhere on Earth, and it was finished 600 years before the birth of Christ. We are still trying to understand how they built it. Then, around the year 250 of our era, the Maya world exploded into its golden age. Historians call it the Classic Period. For the next 650 years, dozens of great cities rose across the lowlands and highlands. Their populations grew into the tens of thousands. Their kings became gods on earth. Their artists, astronomers, and scribes created some of the most beautiful works the ancient world has ever known. This was the Maya at the height of their power. Two cities, above all, dominated this golden age. Tikal, deep in the Guatemalan jungle, with its towering temples and powerful warrior kings. And Calakmul, its rival to the north, a city of equal might and ambition. For nearly 200 years, these two great kingdoms fought a long, bitter war for supremacy. Their armies clashed in jungle ambushes. Their kings were captured and sacrificed. Their alliances shifted like the seasons. And then there were the great kings, men whose names still echo across the centuries. Kianich Janab Pakal of Palenque, who took the throne as a boy of 12 and ruled for nearly 70 years. His reign turned a small jungle city into a jewel of art and architecture. When he died at the age of 80, his body was placed deep inside the Temple of the Inscriptions, beneath a stone slab carved with his portrait, his face covered with a mask of pure jade. And there was Yuknum, the Great of Calakmul, the master strategist who built the largest alliance network the Maya world had ever seen. There was Lady Six Sky of Naranjo, a royal princess sent to revive a fallen city, who waged war and won, ruling as Queen Mother in everything but name. Across the lowlands, dynasty after dynasty rose and fell. Cities allied, cities betrayed, cities burned. And still, for centuries, the civilization kept growing. But somewhere around the year 800, something began to break. One by one, in the southern lowlands, the great cities began to fall silent. The royal monuments stopped being carved. The temple plasters cracked. The plazas emptied. By the year 900, dozens of great cities, including Tikal, Palenque, and Copan, had been almost entirely abandoned. The jungle moved back in, swallowing the streets, climbing the pyramids, covering everything in green. What happened? For more than a century, scholars have argued. The answer, we now believe, was not one disaster, but many. A series of devastating droughts that lasted decades. Soil exhausted from centuries of intensive farming. Forests stripped to make plaster for the temples. Wars between cities growing more brutal, more frequent. Populations swelling beyond what the land could feed. The Maya did not die, but the world they had built could no longer hold itself together. But the Maya story did not end. In the north, in the dry plains of the Yucatan Peninsula, a new chapter was already beginning. Cities like Chichen Itza and Uxmal rose to new heights of power, blending old Maya traditions with influences from central Mexico. Later, around the year 1200, the city of Mayapan became the last great Maya capital, ruling much of the Yucatan until civil war tore it apart around 1450. The civilization had moved, it had changed, but it endured. And then, in the year 1511, a Spanish ship was wrecked on the coast of the Yucatan. A handful of survivors washed ashore. The Maya took them captive. Most were killed. 2 survived to be found, years later, by Spanish conquistadors. The world the Maya knew was about to change forever. Hernán Cortés would arrive in 1519. The campaigns of Francisco de Montejo and his sons would grind through the peninsula for 2 brutal decades. But the Maya did not fall easily. They resisted for nearly 2 centuries. The last independent Maya kingdom, the Itza capital of Nojpeten on an island in Lake Petén Itzá, did not fall to Spanish armies until the year 1697. By then, much of the ancient Maya world had been transformed. But the people, their language, their land, their corn, and their faith, somehow against everything, remained. To truly know the Maya, we must step away from the kings and the temples for a moment. We must walk down from the pyramid steps, past the carved monuments, past the noble palaces, and into the small thatched homes where most Maya actually lived. Because the heart of this civilization was not in its rulers. It was in the rhythm of an ordinary day, a day that began every morning, long before the sun. In the darkness before dawn, the woman of the house was already awake. She knelt beside the hearth in the corner of her one-room home, blowing softly on the embers from the night before. The fire caught. The flames flickered upward. She set a clay griddle, called a comal, onto 3 stones above the flames. From a wooden basket, she pulled the dough she had soaked overnight in lime water. The corn was ready. She knelt before her matat, a long stone slab worn smooth from generations of use. With a stone roller, she ground the soaked corn into a thick, soft dough. Back and forth, back and forth. Her shoulders ached from years of this same motion. Maya women began grinding corn as young girls, and they continued every morning for the rest of their lives. By some estimates, a woman spent 5 hours a day, every day, simply grinding maize. As the first gray light touched the sky, the rest of the house stirred. The husband sat up on his woven sleeping mat, called a patat. He pulled his cotton loincloth around his waist, slipped his feet into simple sandals of woven fiber, and tied a small cloth pouch at his side. The children rose, rubbing their eyes. The mother handed each one a hot tortilla folded around mashed black beans. Breakfast was simple. It was always simple. But it was warm, and it was theirs. Soon after sunrise, the men of the village left for the fields. The Maya called these fields milpas. They were planted in the ancient way. Maize, beans, and squash, all grown together. The maize stalks rose tall. The bean vines climbed up them like ropes. The wide squash leaves spread across the ground below, holding moisture in the soil and shading out weeds. This was farming as poetry. The three sisters, the Maya called them, the mothers of all life. But not every man went to the fields. In the cities, others rose to different work. Stoneworkers walked to the quarries, where great blocks of soft limestone were cut from the bedrock, using only wooden wedges, water, and patience. Plasterers mixed lime and crushed shell to coat the temples in dazzling white. Sculptors carved the names of kings into stone monuments called stelae. And somewhere in a small upper room, a scribe sat down with his brushes, opened a bark paper book, and began to paint. By mid-morning, the marketplaces came alive. These were not small village markets. The great markets of cities like Tikal and Chichen Itza could hold thousands of people, all moving, all bargaining, all calling out their wares. Women laid out woven cotton textiles, vivid with patterns of red and indigo. Men piled up cacao beans, the universal currency of the Maya world. Stacked beside them were obsidian blades, salt cakes, dried fish, jade beads, and woven sandals. There was no money in the Maya world, not in the way we know it. Instead, people traded. They bartered. They paid with what they had grown, hunted, or made. But for larger purchases, three things became almost universal: cacao beans, spondylus shells from the Pacific coast, and small cloth squares of finely woven cotton. A turkey might cost 100 cacao beans, a small jade ornament, perhaps 600, a slave, several thousand. By noon, the sun was high and the air heavy. Most Maya rested during the hottest part of the day. Children napped on cool clay floors. Workers ate small midday meals of fruit, dried fish, or leftover tortillas in the shade of a tree. The marketplace slowed. Even the temples grew quiet. The Maya understood, as so many tropical cultures do, that the body and the land both needed this pause. It was not laziness. It was wisdom. In the afternoon, life returned. Women carried water from the cenotes in large painted clay jars, balanced expertly on their heads. Children ran through the courtyards laughing, kicking small rubber balls. Older boys practiced with their toy bows. Older girls sat beside their mothers and grandmothers, learning to weave on the backstrap loom. The loom was tied at one end to a tree, and at the other, around the weaver's waist. Her body became part of the cloth. The Maya were master weavers. Every pattern told a story. The diamond shape was the cosmos. The zigzag was lightning, the gift of the rain god Chak. The frog meant fertility. A woman could read another woman's huipil like a book, learning where she came from, whether she was married, what village had raised her. Even today, the weavers of highland Guatemala still wear patterns their ancestors wove 1,000 years ago. Boys learned different skills. By the age of 7 or 8, a boy would already be helping his father in the milpa. By 12, he could handle a blowgun for hunting birds. By 15, he was old enough to join a hunting party for deer or peccary. He learned to read the tracks in the mud. He learned the calls of the howler monkey, the macaw, the carasso. He learned slowly and carefully, the kind of patience the forest demanded. The Maya did not have the wheel. They did not have iron. They did not have horses, cattle, or beasts of burden. Everything they built with their hands. Everything they carried on their backs. Long-distance traders, called polam, walked hundreds of miles through jungle paths with heavy bundles of cacao, salt, and obsidian strapped to their foreheads with woven tumplines. They walked, and walked, and walked. As evening approached, the village began to gather. Men returned from the fields, tired but talking. Women prepared the main meal of the day. Tortillas warmed on the comal. Black beans simmered in clay pots. A stew of squash and chili filled the air with its scent. On special days, a turkey might be roasting in the pib oven outside, the smell of achiote and banana leaves drifting through the entire neighborhood. Once the meal was finished, the family gathered around the fire. The grandmother told stories. Stories of the hero twins, who tricked the lords of death and rose into the sky as the sun and the moon. Stories of how the gods made the first humans out of corn dough after their earlier attempts of mud and wood had failed. Stories that had been told, around fires just like this one, for 2,000 years. The children listened in silence, their eyes wide. The fire crackled. The Maya bathed often. Cleanliness mattered. In the cities, the wealthy used small sweat baths called temazcals, carved from stone. Steam rose from heated rocks. Aromatic herbs were thrown onto the coals. The bather sat inside the small dark chamber, sweating out the dust and heat of the day. In the villages, families bathed in cenotes or rivers, especially the women and children, who often went together as the day cooled. As darkness fell, the priests climbed the temple steps. From the high platforms, they watched the stars. They followed the movements of Venus, the brightest of the planets, which they called Chak-ek, the great star. They counted nights. They recorded eclipses. They predicted when the rains would come. While the village slept, the priests stayed awake, listening to the sky speak. Inside the homes, the family lay down on their woven sleeping mats. Some draped cotton blankets across their bodies. The children curled close to their mother. The fire was banked low, just enough to keep insects away. The howler monkeys called in the distance. A jaguar coughed somewhere far in the forest. The village slept. And tomorrow, it would all begin again. The grinding stone, the fields, the market, the fire, the stars. This was Maya life. Not the dramatic ceremonies, not the great wars, not the famous kings, but the patient, daily, beautiful rhythm of human beings, living their lives under the canopy and the stars, generation after generation, for 3,000 years. If you want to understand the Maya, look at their plates, look at what they planted, look at what they hunted, look at what they cooked in their kitchens, season after season, year after year, for 3,000 years. Because for the Maya, food was never just food. It was identity. It was prayer. It was the body of the gods, broken and shared. And at the very center of everything, there was one sacred plant: maize. The Maya did not simply eat maize. They believed they were made of it. According to the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Quiche Maya, the gods tried 3 times to create human beings. First, they made them from mud, but the mud crumbled. Then from wood, but the wooden people had no souls. Finally, the gods ground white corn and yellow corn, mixed it with water, and shaped it into flesh. That flesh became us. We are, according to the Maya, the people of corn. But raw corn, on its own, is not enough to sustain a human body. Eaten alone, over years, it leads to a terrible illness called pellagra. The Maya, somewhere around 3,500 years ago, made a discovery that changed human history. They learned to soak their dry maize kernels in water, mixed with crushed limestone or wood ash overnight. The next morning, the kernels were softer, sweeter, and infinitely more nutritious. They called this process, in later Nahuatl, Nixtamalization. This single discovery unlocked the niacin trapped inside the corn. It made the maize easier to grind. It allowed entire civilizations to be built upon a single grain. Without it, the Maya could not have grown into a population of millions. Without it, there would be no tortillas, no tamales, no atole. Without Nixtamalization, there would be no Maya world. This simple soaking, performed quietly in millions of Maya kitchens, is one of the great unsung discoveries of human history. But corn was only one of 3 sacred crops. Beside it grew the bean, climbing high upon the maize stalk like a green rope, and beside the bean grew the squash, its broad leaves shading the soil. The Maya called them the 3 sisters. Together, they fed both the body and the land. The beans returned nitrogen to the soil. The squash kept the earth cool and moist. The maize fed the people. It was farming as a perfect, living circle. Beyond the milpa, the Maya hunted. Deer was the most prized meat. The white-tailed deer of Mesoamerica was both food and sacred symbol. Men hunted in small groups, using spears, bows, and an ingenious throwing weapon called the atlatl, which gave a thrown dart enormous force. They tracked peccaries, the wild pigs of the jungle. They trapped quail in Curaçao. They speared fish in the cenotes and coastal lagoons, and they kept domesticated turkeys in courtyards near their homes. Beside the hearth, the Maya cook had her tools: the metate, the stone grinder, the comal, the clay griddle, the olla, the round cooking pot, the mortar called a molcajete, used to mash chilies and tomatoes into vivid red salsas. She used wooden spoons, gourd ladles, and woven palm fans to feed the flames. With these few simple tools, she created an entire cuisine. And the most cherished dish of all, the dish of feasts, of festivals, of welcomes and farewells, was the tamale. Today, in millions of homes across Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize, the Maya tamale is still made the way their great-great-grandmothers made it. Let us watch one cook prepare it now, the ancient way. She begins the night before. Into a clay pot, she pours dry white maize kernels and covers them with water. She adds a handful of crushed limestone, mixes it gently, and leaves the pot beside the hearth overnight. The kernels will drink. They will soften. They will transform. In the dawn, she returns to the pot. She drains the soaked corn, rinses it, and carries it to her metate. She kneels. She begins to grind, back and forth with the smooth stone roller, slowly turning the soft kernels into a thick, warm dough. Sweat beads on her brow, her shoulders ache. But the dough builds, ball by ball, on the lower end of the stone. This dough, called masa, is the very heart of every tamale ever made. Once the masa is ready, she prepares the filling. Today, she has been saving a small turkey. She cuts the cooked meat into pieces, then mashes it together with crushed achiote seed, the brilliant red spice that gives Maya cooking its signature color. She adds a pinch of salt, a few dried chilies, a touch of crushed pumpkin seed for richness. The filling, called recado, fills the kitchen with a deep, earthy fragrance. The children, smelling it, begin to gather. Now the wrapping begins. From a stack beside her, she takes long, fresh banana leaves and warms them over the fire. The heat makes them soft and pliable. She lays one leaf across her palm. With a wooden spoon, she spreads a thick patty of masa onto the center. Into the middle of the masa, she presses a generous spoonful of the red turkey recado. With careful, practiced hands, she folds the leaf over and over, sealing the parcel tight. One tamale, then another, then another. Soon, a small mountain of green parcels sits beside her. Now comes the cooking. Outside the home, she uncovers her pib, the ancient underground oven the Maya invented thousands of years ago. She has dug it the day before, a shallow pit lined with smooth stones, in which a wood fire has been burning for hours. The stones are now glowing white-hot. She rakes out the coals. She places the wrapped tamales onto the hot stones, layer by layer. She covers them with more leaves, then with the hot coals, then with a layer of earth. She seals the oven shut, and she waits. For 2 hours, the PIB does its slow work. The stones release their heat. The leaves trap the steam. The masa thickens. The turkey absorbs the achiote, the chili, the smoke. The whole pit hums with quiet, contained heat. And when at last, she opens it, the fragrance that rises from the earth is something no modern oven can recreate. It is smoke, and corn, and meat, and leaf, and patience, and history all at once. The tamales are ready. But the tamale was only one of many Maya foods. There was atole, the warm, thick maize drink, sweetened with honey or vanilla. There was siquil pak, a creamy dip of toasted pumpkin seeds, tomato and chili. There was pak shuk, the marinated grilled meat. There were papadzuls, rolled corn tortillas filled with hard-boiled egg and bathed in pumpkin seed sauce. And above all, for the elite, there was the bitter, frothy, sacred drink of kings, chocolate. Cacao beans were so precious, they served as money. The drink, made by toasting and grinding the beans, mixing them with water, chili, and honey, then pouring it from one vessel to another to build a thick froth, was reserved almost entirely for nobles, warriors, and priests. Common people rarely tasted it. To drink chocolate in Maya society was to taste the food of the gods themselves. Maya society was not flat. It was a pyramid. Like the temples themselves, it rose in clear, distinct layers, each one resting on the labor and loyalty of the layer below. At the very top sat a single figure, the king. The Maya called him the Kuhul Ajau, the Holy Lord. He was not simply a ruler. He was believed to be a living conduit between the gods and the people. His blood, his body, his breath, all sacred. When he spoke, the world listened. Beneath the king sat the nobles. These were the great families of the city, related to the king by blood or marriage. They held the most important offices. They commanded the armies. They governed the smaller towns under the city's control. They wore the finest cotton, embroidered with feathers and shells. They drank chocolate. They were buried with jade. Some of them, the most talented, became the keepers of the sacred knowledge itself, the scribes. The scribes were among the most respected men and women in Maya society. To be a scribe was to hold the language of the gods inside your hand. They trained for years, sometimes from childhood, learning to paint more than 800 hieroglyphic signs onto bark paper, ceramic vessels, and palace walls. They were the historians, the priests, the poets, and the bookkeepers of the kingdom. When a scribe finished a great work, he signed his name to it, just like an artist today. Below the nobles came the warriors. They served the king, fought the wars, captured enemies for sacrifice, and protected the trade routes. The best warriors wore quilted cotton armor soaked in salt water and dried hard. The greatest of them wore the pelt of the jaguar across their shoulders, a sign that they had captured many enemies. To be a warrior was honored, but to die in battle, or to be sacrificed after capture, was, in the Maya view, the highest honor a man could earn. Beneath the warriors came the merchants. The Maya merchant class, the polom, formed long caravans that walked hundreds of miles through dangerous jungle paths. They carried salt from the coast, cacao from the lowland groves, obsidian from the highlands, jade from the river valleys. Some merchants grew wealthy enough to rival the nobles themselves. They had their own patron god, the long-nosed deity called Ek Chua, whose face stared back at them from their painted account books. But the great majority of the Maya were not nobles, scribes, warriors, or merchants. They were farmers, commoners, the men and women who rose before the sun, who planted the milpa, who ground the corn, who built the temples stone by stone, who carried water, who wove the cloth, who raised the children. Without them, the kings on their thrones would have ruled over nothing. Maya civilization rested, completely and entirely, on their shoulders. At the bottom of the pyramid were the slaves. Most were captives taken in war. Some had sold themselves to pay off debts. Their lives were hard, but Maya slavery was not the brutal lifelong condition known in some other ancient societies. A slave could marry. A slave could be freed. A slave's children were sometimes born free, and occasionally, a fortunate slave was adopted into the household of his master and rose to a position of trust. Marriage in Maya society was a serious matter, arranged carefully between families. A young man's father would seek out a matchmaker, called an atanzahab, who would visit the home of a suitable young woman and negotiate the union with her parents. The groom's family offered gifts: cotton cloth, cacao, ceremonial chocolate, turkey. A young woman's skill at weaving was one of the most important measures of her worth. The better she could weave, the more her family received. Women in Maya society had real authority, especially in noble families. Royal women could rule cities. Lady Six Sky of Naranjo led her city through warfare and into a golden age. Lady Cable of El Peruhuaca carried the title Kalumte, a rank higher than her own husband, the king. Common women were the keepers of the household, the weavers, the cooks, the storytellers, the midwives, the healers. In every family, the grandmother was the memory of the household, and her word carried weight. This was Maya society, a pyramid of roles, of duties, of relationships. Each layer depending on the next. Each life, however small, woven into a vast and beautiful pattern that stretched from the corn in the field to the king on his throne, and beyond him, to the gods themselves. If the Maya had built only their pyramids, they would still be remembered. If they had built only their cities, they would still be studied. But the true greatness of the Maya was not in their stone. It was in their minds. In the span of just a few centuries, deep in the jungles of Mesoamerica, the Maya created achievements in writing, mathematics, and astronomy that rival, and in some cases surpass, anything the ancient world ever produced. And almost no one in Europe knew they existed. Their writing was a marvel. The Maya developed one of the only 5 fully independent writing systems ever invented in human history. Their script was made up of more than 800 signs called glyphs. Some glyphs represented entire words. Others represented single sounds. A skilled scribe could blend the two, painting a single name in as many as a dozen different ways, like a poet choosing the most beautiful arrangement of syllables. Their writing was not just communication, it was art. The Maya wrote on stone. They wrote on ceramic. They wrote on the painted walls of their palaces. And, most beautifully, they wrote on books. Their books were called codices. They were made from the inner bark of the wild fig tree, beaten flat, coated with white lime plaster, and folded like a screen, page after page. Some codices stretched longer than a man is tall. They were painted in brilliant red, black, and turquoise. They held the entire knowledge of the Maya world. We know, from the writings of the Spanish, that thousands of these codices once existed. Royal libraries were filled with them. Priests carried them. Scribes copied them. And then, in the year 1562, in the town of Mani in the Yucatan, the Spanish bishop Diego de Landa gathered every codex he could find. He declared them works of the devil. He piled them in the town square, and he burned them. Almost the entire written knowledge of a civilization, lost in a single afternoon. Only 4 Maya codices survived. 4, out of perhaps thousands. They sit today in museums in Dresden, Madrid, Paris, and Mexico City. What they contain is staggering. Astronomical tables that predict the rising and setting of Venus across hundreds of years. Eclipse calculations accurate to within hours. Almanacs of agricultural rituals. Records of gods and ceremonies. These 4 small books are nearly all that remains of a written tradition that once filled an entire civilization. The Maya also gave the world a gift in mathematics. Long before Europe understood it, the Maya had grasped the concept of zero, not as nothing, as a place, a position, a pause in the count. They wrote their numbers using only 3 symbols. A dot, worth 1. A bar, worth 5. And a shell-shaped glyph, worth 0. With these 3 symbols, they could count to numbers in the hundreds of millions. With these 3 symbols, They tracked time itself. Time, for the Maya, was not a straight line. It was a wheel, or rather several wheels, all turning at once. They invented not one calendar, but a system of calendars, each working with the others like the gears of a great cosmic clock. The first was the Tzolk'in, the sacred calendar of 260 days. The second was the Hab, the solar calendar of 365 days. The two calendars meshed together and only realigned once every 52 years. That alignment, the Maya called the calendar round. Beyond these two calendars, the Maya created a third, a way of counting time across enormous spans. They called it the long count. Using their place value math, they could record a date thousands of years into the past or thousands of years into the future. The long count began, according to Maya belief, on a date corresponding to the 11th of August, in the year 3114 before Christ. The date when, they believed, the current creation of the world had begun. But the Maya were not only counting days, they were watching the sky. Their astronomers, working from temple platforms across the lowlands, tracked the movements of the sun, the moon, and the planets with an accuracy that still astonishes modern scientists. They calculated the length of the solar year to within 17 seconds of the true value. They predicted lunar eclipses centuries in advance. They charted the cycle of Venus across more than 100 years, without telescopes, without clocks, with only their eyes, their patience, and their painted books. The Maya built whole cities to align with the stars. At Chichen Itza, on the spring and autumn equinoxes, the setting sun casts a shadow down the steps of the Great Pyramid of Kukulkan. As the light fades, the shadow takes the shape of a serpent, slowly descending the staircase toward the carved snakehead at the bottom. The feathered serpent god returns to Earth, twice a year, every year, for more than 1,000 years. The architecture itself was a calendar, and then there was the ball game. The Maya called it pits or poktapak. It was played in great eye-shaped stone courts found in nearly every Maya city. The largest court of all, at Chichen Itza, stretches longer than a modern football field. The rules are not entirely known. Two teams faced each other, wearing thick, padded belts and protective gear. The ball, made of solid rubber, was heavy enough to break ribs. The players struck it with their hips, their thighs, their forearms. The goal was a stone ring set high on the side wall. But the ball game was never just a game. It was sacred ritual. It reenacted the myth of the hero twins, who defeated the lords of death in the underworld through skill, courage, and play. In its most serious form, the game ended in sacrifice. Sometimes the captain of the losing team, sometimes a captured enemy king playing for his life. Carved panels at Chichen Itza show a player being beheaded, his blood transforming into serpents and life-giving plants. Death feeding life. The Maya wheel turning. Maya art, in all its forms, was bound to the gods and the cosmos. Their sculptors worked in limestone, jade, obsidian, shell, and bone. Their painters covered palace walls with murals so vivid that some still hold their colors today. At the small jungle site of Bonampak in Chiapas, the painted walls of a single inner chamber show us, more clearly than anything else that survives, what the Maya world actually looked like. Warriors in full battle regalia, musicians with conch trumpets, captives kneeling in defeat, a royal court frozen in time. The Maya carried their art on their own bodies. Beauty for them was deliberate. It was crafted. From the moment a baby was born into a noble family, the parents would gently bind small wooden boards to the infant's forehead and the back of the skull. Over weeks, the bones of the soft young head would reshape, lengthening the skull into a high, sloping forehead. To the Maya, this was the shape of the maize god himself. It was the mark of beauty. It was the mark of belonging. They polished their teeth, and many of the elite had small holes drilled into the front of them. Into these holes they inset tiny discs of jade, pyrite, or hematite, so that when they smiled, their teeth gleamed with green and gold. Some sharpened their front teeth into points. Crossed eyes, surprisingly, were considered a sign of great beauty. Mothers would hang small beads of resin from the foreheads of their babies, so that the infants, gazing inward at the dangling bead, would develop the prized inward gaze. They wore jewelry that staggers us still. Jade earplugs the size of small saucers, necklaces of carved jade beads, sometimes with hundreds of pieces strung together, pectorals of polished shell, tall headdresses of woven cane, decorated with the iridescent green tail feathers of the quetzal bird, feathers so precious that to harm a quetzal was punishable by death. To wear the regalia of a Maya king was to carry the weight of an entire kingdom across your shoulders. The Maya also danced. They danced for their gods. They danced for their kings. They danced for the rain, for the harvest, for the dead. Their music was made on turtle-shell drums struck with deer antlers, on long wooden trumpets, on conch shells from the coast, on flutes carved from human bone, on rattles of dried gourds filled with seeds. The sound of a Maya festival, we believe, was rhythmic, complex, hypnotic. The kind of sound that pulls the body into motion without thinking. This was Maya culture. Not one thing, but 1,000 things, all woven together. A written language painted in bark, a mathematics that touched infinity, a sky read like a book, a body shaped like a god, a dance that called the rain, a game that mirrored the death of the soul, a civilization of poets and scientists, artists and dreamers, beneath the green canopy of the rainforest. And they did all of this. They did it themselves. For the Maya, the world was alive. Every stone, every tree, every river, every flicker of fire, every breath of wind carried within it a sacred essence. The Maya called it Ka, divine power, holy presence. To walk through the forest was to walk through a temple. To plant a seed was to perform a prayer. To shape a clay pot, to weave a cloth, to grind the corn, all of these were sacred acts. The line we draw between the spiritual and the everyday did not exist in the Maya mind. The Maya saw the universe as having 3 great levels. Above them stretched the sky, the realm of the celestial gods, the home of the sun and the moon and the stars. Beneath their feet lay the earth, the visible middle world where humans walked and worked and died. And below the earth, hidden in the darkness, lay Xibalba, the watery underworld, the place of fear, the place of the lords of death. The Maya word Xibalba itself means simply the place of fright. At the center of this universe stood the great ceiba tree. The Maya called it the world tree. Its roots reached down into Xibalba. Its trunk rose through the earth. Its branches stretched into the sky. The ceiba was the axis of all things, the pillar that held the 3 worlds together. Even today, in many Maya villages, a single ceiba tree stands at the center of the town square. To cut it down is considered a terrible thing. It is far more than a tree. The Maya prayed to a vast family of gods, not one supreme deity, but many, each ruling over a different part of life, each demanding their own offerings, their own prayers, their own seasons. At the top of this divine family stood Nixtamalization, the great creator god. He was the lord of writing, of healing, of the sky. He was old, white-bearded, kind. The Maya turned to him when they needed wisdom, when they needed mercy, when they needed the past to make sense of the present. Beside Nixtamalization burned the sun god, Kinich Ahau. The Maya watched the sun rise every morning from the eastern horizon, climb across the sky, and sink in the west. They believed that, every night, the sun traveled through Xibalba, fighting its way through the lords of death before being reborn the next dawn. The sun was a warrior, a jaguar in the underworld, a god who needed strength and offerings and blood to keep returning to the world above. And there was Chak, the rain god, perhaps the most beloved of all. In a world where drought could mean death for entire cities, Chak was the bringer of life. He carried a great stone axe, with which he split the clouds and called down the storms. His long, curling nose pointed up into the heavens. His face stared down from temple walls across the Yucatan, watching, waiting, listening for the prayers and offerings that would call him back to earth. When Chak came, the corn grew. When Chak forgot, the people starved. There was Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, the god of wind and learning and rebirth, who descended the pyramid steps at every equinox. There was Ixchel, the goddess of the moon, of childbirth, of weaving, of medicine. She was the patroness of women, and Maya wives would travel pilgrimages to her sacred island of Cozumel to ask her blessing before becoming mothers. There were corn gods, death gods, bee gods, jaguar gods. Maya religion was vast, layered, breathing, alive. The Maya believed that the gods, in their generosity, had given everything to humans: life, corn, rain, children, knowledge, the sun in the morning, the moon at night, and in return, the gods asked only one thing: reciprocity. They asked to be remembered. They asked to be fed. The Maya believed that the gods grew hungry, just as humans did, hungry for prayer, hungry for incense, hungry for offerings, hungry, at times, for blood. And the most precious offering of all came from the human body itself. The deepest sacred places of the Maya were not their temples. They were caves. The Maya believed that caves were the actual mouths of Xibalba. To enter a cave was to enter the underworld itself. Inside the dark, dripping passages, priests would conduct the most powerful rituals. Offerings would be left in the deepest chambers. Burials of important persons would be placed in side passages. And in the cenotes, the open natural wells that dotted the Yucatan, the Maya cast their most precious gifts to the gods below. To understand the Maya soul, we must turn to their sacred book, the Popol Vuh, the council book of the Quiche Maya. Written down in alphabetic script in the 16th century, but preserving stories far older, the Popol Vuh tells the great Maya creation story. It tells of the first failed humans, of mud and wood. It tells of the great flood that destroyed them. It tells of the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, who journeyed down into Xibalba to defeat the lords of death through cleverness, courage, and play. In the Popol Vuh, the twins are tested over and over. They are sent into the house of cold, the house of jaguars, the house of bats, the house of razors. The lords of Xibalba pit them in ball games they cannot lose. The lords of death watch with hungry eyes. But the twins are too clever. Through trickery, sacrifice, and rebirth, they defeat the lords of death. They rise, finally, into the sky. One becomes the sun, the other becomes the moon. And from their victory, the world we know was born. For the Maya, this was not just a story. It was the pattern of all life. Death always followed by rebirth. Darkness always followed by dawn. Sacrifice always followed by renewal. When a Maya farmer planted a seed of corn into the earth, he was burying it, as the twins had been buried in Xibalba. When the green shoot pushed up through the soil, the corn was rising again, just as the twins had risen. Every harvest was a victory over death. Every meal was a small resurrection. This was the soul of the Maya, a people who saw the universe not as a thing, but as a living, breathing conversation. A people who believed they were the children of corn. A people who knew that life is a circle, and that what dies must always, somehow, return. There are practices in the Maya world that, even today, can be difficult to understand. Practices that seem strange to modern eyes. Practices that have shocked, fascinated, and confused outsiders for 500 years. But to dismiss them as cruel or savage is to misunderstand the Maya entirely. Every ritual, every ceremony, every act of devotion was rooted in a single profound belief: that the universe was a fragile gift and that humans had a sacred duty to keep it alive. Among the most extraordinary of Maya practices was bloodletting. The Maya believed that blood was not simply a substance. It was the carrier of life itself. It contained chul, the sacred essence of being. And the gods, in their hunger, were nourished by it. When a king pierced his own flesh, when a queen drew a thorned rope through her tongue, when a priest cut his earlobe and let the blood drip onto strips of bark paper, these were not acts of cruelty. They were acts of love. Gifts to the gods from the only thing the Maya truly owned, their own bodies. The blood was caught on long strips of bark paper. When the offering was complete, the paper was placed in a stone bowl and set on fire. As the bloodied paper burned, the smoke rose upward in twisting columns. The Maya believed that, in that rising smoke, the gods would appear. They called this the vision serpent. A great spiritual being that emerged from the burning offering, opened its jaws, and through it, an ancestor or a god could speak directly to the living. This was not superstition. This was the most sacred conversation a Maya king could have. There was also human sacrifice. Let us speak of it honestly, but carefully. Human sacrifice did exist in the Maya world, but it was rare, ritualized, and almost always reserved for high-status captives taken in war, a captured rival king, a defeated warrior of noble birth. These were the lives the Maya believed could carry the most powerful messages to the gods. Common prisoners were enslaved, traded, or used for labor. The sacrifice itself, when it came, was treated as the most solemn and consequential event in the city's life. The sacred ball game, pits, was sometimes the stage of these rituals. In its highest form, the game became a reenactment of the hero twins' battle against the Lords of Death. Two teams played not for sport, but for cosmic balance. Carved reliefs at Chichen Itza show that, in some versions of the ritual, the captain of the losing team was sacrificed at the end of the match. To die in this ritual was, in the Maya understanding, to win the eternal game. The sacrificed player would rise, like the maize, like the hero twins, into the sky as a star. The Maya also practiced ritual offerings to the cenotes. At Chichen Itza, the great sacred cenote, a perfectly circular natural well 60 meters across, has been dredged by archaeologists for over a century. From its dark waters, they have pulled jade, gold, copper, carved wooden idols, ceramic vessels filled with copal incense, and the bones of more than 200 individuals, mostly men, women, and children of all ages. Some were already dead when they were lowered into the cenote. Others may have been sent down alive, as messengers to the gods of the underworld below. The Maya royal burial was a profoundly different practice. When a great king died, his death was not seen as an ending. It was a journey. His body was prepared with extraordinary care. A jade bead was placed in his mouth to serve as his sole currency in the afterlife. His face was covered with a mosaic mask of jade, shell, and obsidian. His body was wrapped in fine cotton textiles, painted with cinnabar, the bright red pigment of resurrection. And then he was sealed inside the heart of a pyramid. In the year 1948, the Mexican archaeologist Alberto Ruiz Huillier made one of the most astonishing discoveries in the history of archaeology. Inside the Temple of the Inscriptions at Palenque, he and his team spent 4 years clearing rubble from a staircase hidden in the temple floor. At the bottom, behind a sealed door, they found the untouched tomb of King Pakal. The king's body was still there, his jade death mask still in place. His sarcophagus lid, carved with one of the most beautiful images in all of Maya art, showed Pakal himself, falling into the underworld, with the great world tree rising above him. Pakal had been sealed inside that pyramid for over 1,300 years. And yet, when the seal was broken, the past stepped out into the present, exactly as it had been left. This was the Maya understanding of death made real. The king had not vanished. He had been waiting. Today, His jade mask sits in the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. His face stares back at every visitor who walks past it. After more than a millennium, the king still holds court. These were the practices of the Maya. Strange, perhaps. Difficult, perhaps. But beneath them, always, was a single sacred idea: that life and death were not opposites. They were partners. And every act of devotion, however hard, however costly, was the price of keeping the world alive. The Maya were never a closed people. From their earliest days, they were traders, travelers, and diplomats. Their canoes paddled along the rivers of Belize, down the coast of the Yucatan, and across the Gulf of Honduras. Their long caravans of foot merchants crossed mountain passes carrying salt, jade, cacao, and obsidian. They reached the great markets of Teotihuacán, the giant city in the central Mexican highlands, more than 1,000 kilometers from their homeland. They knew of the wider world, and the wider world knew of them. In the 4th century, something remarkable happened. A delegation arrived at the gates of Tikal. They came from Teotihuacán, the mysterious metropolis to the north. Their leader, a warrior recorded in Maya glyphs as Siaj Kak, born of fire, entered the city. Within days, the king of Tikal was dead. A new dynasty took the throne. For the next 2 centuries, Teotihuacan's influence shaped Maya art, weapons, and politics. The two civilizations did not just trade. At times, they shared rulers. Later, in the 10th century, another wave of outsiders reshaped the Maya world. From the central Mexican highlands came the Toltec influence, sweeping into the northern Yucatan. New gods were welcomed beside the old ones. Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, took on the features of the Toltec god Quetzalcoatl. The architecture of Chichen Itza blended Maya and Toltec styles into something the world had never seen before. The Maya were never simply conquered by these outsiders. They absorbed them. They adapted them. They made them their own. And then, on a March morning in the year 1511, the world changed. A small wooden ship, a Spanish caravel returning from Panama, was caught in a violent storm and broken on the reefs of the eastern Yucatan. 20 survivors washed ashore. Maya warriors found them, captured them, and brought them inland. Most were killed. 2 men survived. One of them, a young sailor named Geronimo de Aguilar, would later be rescued by the army of Hernán Cortés in 1519 and would serve as a translator that would help bring down the great Aztec Empire. The first contact had been made. The Spanish conquest of the Maya was unlike any other in the Americas. There was no single capital to capture, no single emperor to overthrow. The Maya world was a constellation of dozens of small kingdoms, each fiercely independent, each determined to resist. The first serious campaign began in 1527, when the Spanish nobleman Francisco de Montejo landed in the Yucatan with 3 ships and several hundred soldiers. He expected, like Cortés before him, a quick victory. He got a war. For nearly 20 years, the Montejo family campaigned across the peninsula. They lost battles. They were driven back to the sea. They returned. They lost cities they thought they had won. Maya leaders united, then divided, then united again. By 1547, the main conquest of the northern Yucatan was finally complete, but entire regions remained beyond Spanish control. And deep in the jungles of northern Guatemala, on an island in the middle of Lake Petén Itzá, one final Maya kingdom still stood. It was called Noy Petén, the Itzá capital, the last free Maya city in the world. For 150 years, the Itzá held out. Spanish missionaries arrived offering peace. The Itzá kings sent them home. Spanish armies were assembled, then turned back by jungle, disease, and fierce resistance. The Itzá ruler, Khan Ek, refused every demand for surrender. And then, on the morning of the 13th of March, 1697, a Spanish force under Martín de Ursúa launched a final assault. They came across the water in a long wooden galley. The Itzá met them on the shore. The battle was brutal. The last Maya kingdom fell that day. By nightfall, the Spanish flag flew over Noypeten. The temples were torn down. The codices were burned. The 2,000-year-old story of independent Maya kingdoms had reached its final page. But the Maya themselves, the people, the language, the corn, the stars, the prayers, the memory, could not, be erased. The fall of Noypeten in 1697 was not the end of the Maya. It was the beginning of a long, hard, silent chapter. For more than 3 centuries, under Spanish rule and later under the new republics of Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador, the Maya endured. Their lands were taken. Their languages were forbidden in schools. Their religion was driven underground, hidden inside the rituals of the Catholic saints. But beneath every official conquest, the Maya world kept breathing. In the kitchens, in the milpas, in the languages spoken between mothers and daughters, in the patterns woven into the cloth. In the year 1847, the Maya of the Yucatan rose up. Pushed off their lands, taxed into starvation, abused by a colonial system that refused to see them as fully human, they fought back. The conflict that followed is called the Caste War of Yucatan. For more than half a century, Maya armies controlled large parts of the peninsula. They established their own independent state, with its capital at Chan Santa Cruz. They fought with rifles, with discipline, and with the conviction that the gods themselves had spoken through a wooden cross, telling them to take their land back. The caste war did not officially end until 1901, but the 20th century would bring even harder trials. In the highlands of Guatemala, a civil war that began in 1960 turned by the 1980s into a campaign of genocide. Military regimes targeted Maya villages, accusing them of harboring leftist guerrillas. Entire communities were destroyed. By the time the war ended in 1996, an estimated 200,000 people had been killed, most of them Maya civilians. Hundreds of villages had been wiped from the map. It was one of the darkest chapters in modern Latin American history. And yet, even from that darkness, a Maya voice rose, and the world listened. Her name was Rigoberta Menchú Tum, a Quiché Maya woman from the highlands of Guatemala. She had lost her father, her mother, and her brothers to the violence. In 1983, she dictated her life story to a journalist in Paris. The book that resulted carried her testimony across the world. In 1992, on the 500th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the Americas, Rigoberta Menchú was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. The Maya, so long silenced, so long invisible, had at last stepped onto the world's largest stage. And they had not come asking. They had come telling. Today, more than 7 million people across Mexico and Central America identify as Maya. They speak some 30 different Mayan languages. Yucatec Maya, spoken across the peninsula. Quiché and Cachiquel and Mam in the Guatemalan highlands. Tzotzil and Celtal in Chiapas. Quechua in Belize and Guatemala. These are not endangered relics. These are living, evolving languages, spoken in homes, on the radio, in schools, in courts of law. The voice of the ancestors is still on the air. In the markets of Antigua and Chichicastenango, in the cooperatives of Chiapas, in the villages of Belize, Maya weavers are reclaiming the ancient patterns of their grandmothers. Each huipil, each sash, each woven belt carries a story. The diamonds, the lightning, the frogs, the corn. Some weavers earn good livings selling their work to museums and collectors around the world. Some teach the craft to younger women so the patterns will not be forgotten. The backstrap loom, the same instrument the ancient Maya tied between their bodies and the trees, still turns thread into history every single day. But the modern Maya world also faces real challenges. Tourism, while it brings much-needed income, has also turned sacred sites like Chichen Itza and Tikal into theme parks. Climbing on the pyramids has been banned, but the pressure of millions of visitors a year erodes the very stones the Maya carved with such care. land disputes continue. Mining and logging threaten the rainforests. Maya farmers, like farmers everywhere, struggle with climate change, drought, and falling crop prices. The challenges are real, but the Maya have always known how to endure. In the cities and villages of the Maya world, a quiet revolution is underway. Young Maya activists are taking seats in parliaments. Maya filmmakers are telling their own stories on screen. Maya doctors are bringing ancient herbal knowledge into modern medicine. Maya astronomers, fittingly, are studying the stars at universities their ancestors could only have dreamed of. The Maya are no longer the past. They are the present, and more, they are choosing their own future. The story of the modern Maya is not a story of recovery from extinction. It is a story of a people who were never extinct. A people who carried their world through 5 centuries of storm. A people whose flame has, against everything, kept burning. The future of the Maya is being written now, in real time, in ways their ancestors could scarcely have imagined. In the year 2018, a remarkable thing happened. Archaeologists working in the Guatemalan jungle deployed a new technology called LiDAR. From small aircraft flying high above the rainforest canopy, lasers pulsed downward, mapping the ground beneath the trees with extraordinary precision. What the lasers revealed shocked the world. More than 60,000 previously unknown Maya structures, hidden for over 1,000 years beneath the forest, suddenly came into view. Roads, plazas, reservoirs, defensive walls, houses, entire cities, larger than anyone had ever guessed. The Maya world, it turns out, was far more populated, far more developed, far more interconnected than archaeologists had ever realized. Some estimates now suggest that the lowland Maya population, at its peak, may have exceeded 15 million people. The jungle, which had seemed to swallow their civilization, had instead been hiding it, patiently, for 1,000 years, waiting for us to learn how to see again. At the same time, on the other side of the world, scholars are completing one of the great intellectual quests of our age: the decipherment of the Maya glyphs. For most of the 20th century, the script remained largely unreadable. But beginning in the 1950s, the brilliant Russian linguist Yuri Norozov cracked the code. Over the decades that followed, hundreds of researchers, including a growing number of Maya scholars themselves, added piece after piece. Today, more than 90% of all known Maya glyphs can be read. The ancestors are speaking again, and we are finally beginning to understand what they said. In schools across Guatemala, Mexico, and Belize, a quiet language revival is underway. For the first time in generations, Maya children are learning to read and write in their ancestral tongues. Yucatec Maya is being taught in universities. Children's books are being printed in Quichua. Radio stations broadcast in Kichi. Maya pop music plays on Spotify. The languages that were banned, that were beaten out of school children, that were nearly lost, are finding their voices again. And they are speaking more and more in confident tones. And the children themselves are dreaming new dreams. Some study astronomy at the great observatories of Mexico and the United States, mapping the same stars their ancestors charted with bark paper and patience. Some study medicine, combining the knowledge of their grandmother's herb gardens with the precision of modern science. Some make films, write novels, code software, design fashion. The Maya were never a people of the past. They are, as they have always been, a people of every possible future. The story of the Maya was never about pyramids. It was never about kings. It was never about ruins. It was always, from the very beginning, about a people who learned to read the sky, a people who shaped corn into civilization, a people who carried their world through fire and silence and loss, and who carry it still. Their future is not yet written, but the hands that will write it are already at work. We began this journey in the darkness before dawn, in the mist of the rainforest, in the silent footsteps of a jaguar moving through the green. we end it the same way, with the sun rising once more over the jungles of Petén, with the temples of Tikal catching the first light, just as they have caught it every morning for 2,000 years, with the howler monkeys calling in the distance, and the smoke of a single cook fire rising from a small Maya village hidden somewhere in the trees below. The Maya story is one of the great stories of our species. A story of human ingenuity, growing slowly from the first farmers who pressed corn seeds into the earth, into a civilization that mapped the stars, invented zero, and carved its memory into stone. A story of art and science and faith braided into one single way of seeing the world. A story of triumph, and yes, of tragedy. Of golden ages, and of long centuries of silence. A story of a people who built mountains by hand, and who, against every odd, are still here. For too long, the world told the Maya story as a tragedy, as a vanished civilization, as ruins in the jungle, as a mystery without an answer. But the Maya were never a mystery. They were never vanished. They were here, all along, speaking, weaving, cooking, praying, teaching their children the names of the stars and the patterns of the cloth, carrying the world forward, quietly, patiently, the way they have always done, the way they will continue to do, long after the cameras stop rolling. Somewhere, this morning, a Maya farmer is walking out to his milpa. Somewhere, a Maya mother is grinding nixtamal on her metate. Somewhere, a Maya child is hearing the story of the hero twins for the very first time. Somewhere, a Maya scholar is reading a glyph her ancestors carved 1,200 years ago. Somewhere, a young Maya woman is looking up through a telescope at Venus, the planet her ancestors tracked with such precision, and smiling. The civilization did not fall. It changed. It endured. It is still becoming. The Popol Vuh tells us that the gods made the first true humans out of corn, that we were shaped from a soft golden dough and given hands to work, and eyes to see, and mouths to speak, and hearts to remember. The Maya have remembered. For 3,000 years they have remembered. And as long as there is a child somewhere, listening to a grandmother by the firelight, the remembering will go on. The fire is still burning. The codex is still open. The story is not finished. It is only, in this moment, paused. And somewhere, deep in the green heart of the Americas, the jungle is still speaking.